"He is going to put you on the floor," Victoria Hale said, and the private training room laughed with her. Caleb Turner stood at the edge of the padded mat in a gray work jacket, one hand loose at his side, the other still holding the small tool case he had carried into Hale Meridian's headquarters 30 minutes earlier. Across from him, Grant Mercer removed his watch and placed it beside a folded towel. He was 6'4", broad through the shoulders, and trained to move without wasting anything. Victoria trusted him with her life. She did not trust Caleb with 10 feet of hallway. Sophie sat near the glass wall, both hands wrapped around the silver whistle her father had given her years earlier. She was 8, old enough to recognize when adults were trying to make someone smaller. Miles Corbin, the company's security director, stood beside Victoria with an easy smile. "This should settle the question," he said. Caleb looked at Grant's front foot, then at the angle of his shoulders. He did not raise his fists. "I did not come here to fight anyone." Victoria crossed her arms. "You came here to tell me my security team does not know how to protect me. I said your west corridor has a blind spot. And Grant said it does not." Caleb glanced toward the mirrored wall, where one ceiling camera pointed 3 degrees too far toward the elevators. Small error. Clean enough to miss. Large enough to matter. Grant is watching the wrong direction. The room quieted slightly. Grant stepped onto the mat. "Then show me." Caleb looked toward Sophie. She did not speak. She only held the whistle tighter. He set the tool case beside the wall and removed his jacket, revealing a plain blue work shirt beneath it. No uniform. No rank. Nothing that explained the way Elliot Shaw, the older independent security advisor near the door, had stopped smiling. "One controlled entry," Grant said. "No striking." Caleb nodded. "No injuries." Victoria lifted her coffee. "You are setting conditions already?" Caleb met her eyes. "I am making sure your employee goes home tonight." Miles laughed first. Victoria followed, though hers was colder. Grant did not. He had begun studying Caleb's stance. And found almost nothing to read. No tension in the shoulders. No weight loaded into the back leg. Caleb stood like a man waiting for an elevator. "Ready?" Grant asked. Caleb looked once at his lead foot. "Whenever you are." Grant moved forward with a standard restraint entry, fast and technically clean, reaching for Caleb's upper arm while shifting his weight to control the center line. Caleb stepped half a pace to the outside. His left hand redirected Grant's wrist. His right forearm guided the shoulder. Then he turned his hips and let Grant's own momentum finish what strength never needed to begin. 3 seconds later, Grant was on the mat, one arm safely controlled, his breathing steady, his face more surprised than angry. Caleb released him immediately and stepped back. "Anything hurt?" Grant sat up slowly. "No." Victoria's coffee remained halfway to her mouth. No one laughed. Caleb offered Grant his hand and pulled him to his feet. Then he pointed toward the mirrored wall. "You protected the door because every drill taught you the threat would come through it." Grant followed his gaze to the misaligned camera. Caleb looked at Victoria. But the person who adjusted that camera was already inside. 30 minutes earlier, Caleb had entered Hale Meridian's headquarters through the West Service lobby with Sophie beside him and a compact security tool case in his hand. The marble floor reflected everything clearly except the reason he had been called. A faulty access reader on the executive level had rejected 3 authorized employees, and 2 cameras near the private elevators had briefly lost alignment during the same week. The request described a routine inspection. Caleb understood before reaching the 23rd floor that it was not routine. Sophie walked quietly at his side, wearing her navy school sweater and carrying the silver whistle on a cord beneath it. Her after-school program had closed without warning because of a broken water line, and Caleb had no one else available to watch her. He had apologized to the receptionist once. He did not apologize again. Lauren Price met them outside the executive security suite and led them through a glass corridor overlooking downtown Chicago. "Ms. Hale has a board meeting in less than an hour," she said. "Security wants this resolved quickly." Caleb looked at the camera above the corridor intersection. Its housing was level, but the lens pointed slightly too far toward the elevators. "How long has that been turned?" Lauren followed his eyes. "It has not. Someone moved it." Before she could answer, the conference room doors opened. Victoria Hale stepped out with Grant Mercer at her right shoulder and Miles Corbin behind them. She wore a fitted ivory blazer and carried a coffee she had not finished. Grant scanned Caleb once, then Sophie, then the tool case. Miles looked only at Caleb's work jacket. "The locksmith is here," he said. Caleb did not correct him immediately. "I am here for the access reader and camera faults." Victoria glanced toward Lauren. "This is the specialist you called?" "Independent Security Diagnostics," Lauren said. He reviewed the preliminary logs. Victoria looked back at Caleb. "You brought a child to an executive security inspection." Sophie moved closer to her father. Caleb kept his voice even. "Her program closed early. She will stay with me." "And what have you found in the 90 seconds you have been standing here?" "Your West Corridor camera leaves part of the service approach uncovered." Grant's expression did not change. "That corridor is inside 2 controlled access zones. Which means your team assumes anyone reaching it has already been cleared." Miles gave a short laugh. He saw one camera angle and diagnosed the building. Caleb looked toward the access reader beside Victoria's private hallway. The indicator flashed green before anyone presented a badge, then returned to neutral. It happened quickly. No one else turned. "The reader is receiving a remote validation pulse," he said. "From where?" Victoria asked. "I do not know yet. But you know my bodyguard is standing in the wrong place." Caleb looked at Grant's position. He was close enough to shield Victoria from the conference room entrance, but the service corridor remained behind her left shoulder. "Yes." Victoria smiled, and the people near the security desk smiled. "With her. Have you ever protected anyone besides a toolbox?" Sophie looked up at Caleb. The question landed harder because she heard it. He said nothing for several seconds. Elliot Shaw, standing near the training room door, studied the way Caleb checked every reflection before answering. "He did not say Grant was weak," Elliot said. "He said the threat model was wrong." Miles turned toward the private training room. "Then perhaps our technician should demonstrate the difference." Caleb shook his head. "I do not fight for demonstrations." Victoria lifted her coffee. "Convenient." Grant removed his jacket and opened the training room door. "One controlled entry," he said. "Then we can return to the cameras." Caleb looked at Sophie, then at the misaligned lens above them. He already knew the test was meant to embarrass him. What he did not know was why Miles seemed so determined to keep him away from the access logs. Grant did not step onto the mat immediately. He closed the training room door, placed his jacket and watch on a bench, then looked at Caleb with the measured patience of a man accustomed to being underestimated only by people who regretted it. Caleb remained near the wall with his tool case at his feet. Sophie sat beside it, both hands wrapped around the silver whistle beneath her sweater. Victoria stood outside the padded area with Miles and Lauren, her coffee balanced in one hand, while Elliot Shaw watched from near the mirrored wall. "You can still decline," Grant said. "I already did." "Then we are finished." Miles smiled. "Unless the expert prefers to keep making accusations he cannot support." Caleb looked toward the ceiling camera reflected in the mirror. Its housing appeared straight from this angle. The lens did not. "I made an observation." "You said the head of executive protection was facing the wrong direction," Victoria replied. "In front of his own team." Caleb met her eyes. "Because he was." The room went quiet for a moment. Grant stepped onto the mat. One controlled entry. I will attempt to restrain you. You may redirect and disengage. No strikes. No joint pressure beyond compliance. Caleb did not move. This proves nothing about the camera. It proves whether you understand protection well enough to criticize mine, Victoria said. Sophie looked at her father. She had seen him walk away from arguments before. At the grocery store. At school meetings. In the parking lot when someone mistook his silence for weakness. He always told her that not every challenge deserved an answer. This one felt different because the people in the room were not only laughing at him. They were refusing to look where he had pointed. Dad, she said softly, you do not have to. Caleb turned toward her. I know. Elliot studied the way he checked the door behind Sophie, the reflection in the glass, the distance between Victoria and the service corridor, all before considering Grant. Where did you train? Elliot asked. A long time ago. Military? Miles interrupted. Or another weekend certification? Caleb ignored him. Elliot did not. He watches exits before people. Grant's expression changed slightly. Respect had not arrived, but caution had. Caleb removed his gray jacket and folded it beside Sophie. Underneath, he wore a plain navy work shirt with no insignia and no name stitched above the pocket. If I agree, we stop after one entry. Grant nodded. Agreed. And if I redirect you, you do not try to recover into a second restraint. Concerned I might adapt. Concerned the demonstration will become more important than the reason I came. Victoria set her coffee on the narrow ledge beside the glass. You speak as though everyone in this room has something to prove except you. Caleb looked at the access reader visible through the open doorway. Its green indicator flashed once without a badge. Again. Same interval. I have a daughter waiting to go home, he said. That is what matters to me. Miles folded his arms. Then stop wasting her time. Caleb stepped onto the mat. Grant moved to the opposite edge and settled into a balanced stance, left foot forward, hands open. He was disciplined. Fast. Strong enough to control most men before they understood the entry had begun. Caleb noticed the weight resting slightly too far over the lead leg and the habit of protecting Victoria's right side even when she was not standing there. Training had built the pattern. Repetition had hidden it. Sophie lifted the whistle to her lips but did not blow. Elliot's eyes narrowed. He recognized the stillness in Caleb now, not fear, not hesitation, but calculation stripped of everything unnecessary. Grant raised one hand. Ready? Caleb looked once at his lead foot. Whenever you are. Grant moved first, fast enough that the soft soles of his training shoes barely made a sound against the mat. His left hand reached for Caleb's upper arm while his right moved toward the shoulder, a clean restrained entry designed to control balance before resistance could begin. Caleb did not step backward. He shifted half a pace outside Grant's lead foot, turned his wrist away from the grip, and placed one hand lightly against Grant's forearm. The motion was small. Almost unimpressive. Then Grant's weight continued where his body no longer had support. Caleb guided the shoulder, changed the angle of the wrist, and turned his hips just enough to redirect the momentum already moving past him. Grant went down onto the padded mat in one controlled motion, his arms secured without pressure and his breathing unchanged. 3 seconds. Maybe less. Caleb released him immediately and stepped back. Anything hurt? Grant remained still for a moment, not from pain, but from surprise. No, Victoria's coffee had stopped halfway to her mouth. Miles no longer smiled. Lauren looked from Grant to Caleb as though the room had changed shape around them. Sophie lowered the whistle from her lips. Elliot Shaw was the only person who seemed unsurprised. Grant sat up, looked at the position of his own front foot, then at Caleb. You used the entry. You gave me the direction. Caleb offered his hand. Grant accepted it and stood. There was no humiliation in the gesture. No celebration. Caleb moved away from the center of the mat as if the demonstration had ended exactly where it should. Victoria set her coffee down on the ledge. You expect me to believe that was luck? No, then what was it? Caleb looked toward the mirrored wall. A repeated pattern. Grant followed his gaze. My stance. Your assignment. The answer made him frown. Caleb pointed toward the door Victoria had entered through. Every drill places the threat there. Every formation turns your lead side toward that entrance. Your body learned the room before it learned the person. Grant looked at Victoria's usual position beside the glass. From that angle, his right shoulder shielded her from the conference room door. The service corridor remained behind her left side, partly reflected in the mirror and barely covered by the misaligned camera. He is not weak, Caleb said. He is pointed the wrong way. No one spoke. The statement defended Grant even after proving him vulnerable. That seemed to disturb Miles more than the takedown had. A training room trick does not establish a security failure, he said. Caleb picked up his jacket but did not put it on. Then let us stop performing and look at the logs. Victoria studied him with a different expression now. The amusement was gone. In its place was calculation, and beneath that, the first trace of discomfort. What exactly do you think you will find? 11 minutes missing from the west corridor every night. Lauren turned sharply. How do you know that? Caleb nodded toward the access reader visible through the doorway. It accepts a remote validation pulse every 60 seconds. The camera is angled to hide whoever tests it. Miles folded his arms. That is speculation. Caleb looked at the green indicator. It flashed again without a badge. Then open the system and prove me wrong. Elliot stepped closer to the glass and studied Caleb's face. Turner, he said quietly. The name carried recognition, not introduction. Caleb looked at him. Elliot's expression changed. Federal Witness Protection Detail, Midwest Division. Victoria looked between them. Miles went still. Caleb's voice remained flat. That was a long time ago. Elliot glanced at Sophie, then back at Caleb. Not long enough for someone in this building to forget who might recognize a manufactured blind spot. Victoria did not ask Caleb to explain his old assignment in front of everyone. She looked at Elliot Shaw, saw that the recognition was real, then turned toward the glass corridor where the misaligned camera continued watching the wrong section of floor. Open the security logs, she said. Miles Corbin answered before Lauren could move. We should verify his credentials first. Caleb put his gray jacket back on and zipped the tool case. My credentials will not change the camera angle. Grant stood near the mat, no longer defensive, studying the service corridor through the mirror. Neither will another argument. Lauren led them into the executive security room, a narrow space lined with wall monitors, access maps, and live feeds from every floor of Hale Meridian. Sophie followed Caleb and sat in a chair near the door, the silver whistle resting against her navy sweater. Victoria noticed that Caleb positioned the chair where he could see Sophie, the hallway, and both exits without turning his head. It was not a performance. He did it before sitting down himself. Lauren opened the West Corridor archive. The recordings appeared complete. Each night showed empty marble floors, closed office doors, and the service elevator remaining inactive. There is no missing footage, Miles said. Caleb watched the time display in the corner of the feed. Play 2:17 in the morning. Lauren selected the previous night. The corridor remained empty. A cleaning cart stood near the far wall. 11 minutes passed without movement. Then the cart appeared 6 inches closer to the elevator. Grant leaned toward the screen. It moved without crossing the camera. Caleb nodded. Because those 11 minutes are not live footage. They are a loop. Lauren checked another night. Same cart. Same shadow beneath the elevator sign. Same faint reflection in the polished floor. At 2:28, the image returned to real time. Victoria stood behind Caleb, her arms no longer crossed. Why 11 minutes? Long enough to enter the service corridor, reach the private elevator, and leave before the feed resumes. Miles shook his head. A camera fault can repeat frames. Not with a clean timestamp. Caleb asked Lauren to display the access records beside the video. At 2:17, the West reader showed no entry. At 2:18, Victoria's private elevator received a valid executive command from the 23rd floor. At 2:26, the command cleared itself. Grant looked at Miles. Only executive security can issue that command. And facilities, Miles replied. And the chief executive's office. Victoria's expression hardened. My office was empty. Caleb pointed to the access reader log. A short green pulse appeared every 60 seconds during the loop, the same pattern he had seen in the corridor. Someone is testing a temporary credential while the camera repeats old footage. Lauren searched the credential source. The system returned an administrator code with no assigned badge name. That should not exist, she said. Miles moved toward the console. Let me review the authentication table. Caleb stepped between him and the keyboard without touching him. Make a copy first. Miles stopped. You are not authorized to control this room. Victoria looked at Caleb, then at Miles. The choice remained visible on her face for only a second. Lauren, copy everything to an offline drive. Miles's jaw tightened. Grant noticed. So did Elliot. Caleb looked at the floor plan displayed beside the feeds. The blind corridor, the private elevator, and the executive conference room formed one clean path. No forced doors. No broken locks. No outside entry. Grant was protecting you from the lobby, Caleb said quietly. Whoever built this path never needed to use it. Victoria stared at the red line Lauren drew across the map. It ended outside her office. Caleb looked at Miles. They were already inside. Victoria kept her eyes on the route drawn across the security map. The line began at the service corridor, passed through the private elevator, and ended less than 20 feet from her office. Miles stood near the console with one hand resting beside the keyboard, but Lauren had already started copying the logs to an offline drive. Grant moved closer to the West Corridor feed, no longer watching Caleb as an outsider. He was watching the building as though it had changed around him. How many people can create an unassigned administrator credential? Victoria asked. Miles answered first. 3 departments have elevated access. Names. Security, facilities, and executive systems. That was not what I asked. The room became still. Caleb looked at the live feeds, then at Sophie near the door. She sat with the silver whistle against her chest, and he had placed her chair where no one could approach without crossing his line of sight. Victoria noticed again. She had assumed he scanned rooms because he wanted everyone to see him doing it. Now she understood he did it because he could not stop measuring distance between danger and the person he was responsible for. 3 people, Miles said at last. Myself, the facilities director, and Lauren. Lauren turned from the copy station. My credentials cannot issue elevator commands. Miles looked at her. Not under your normal profile. Do not change the answer now, Victoria said. Caleb asked Lauren to compare the administrator code against access changes from the past 6 months. The results showed small modifications spread across different dates, a camera maintenance window, a temporary elevator override, a patrol route adjustment, and a software update that removed badge names from archived logs after 30 days. None of them looked serious alone. Together, they built 11 invisible minutes. Every change was approved through security, Grant said. Miles folded his arms. Because security manages the system. Who requested them? Caleb asked. Miles gave him a flat look. You are still a contractor. Victoria stepped between them. He is asking the questions I should have asked. The words carried no apology, but something in her voice had changed. Caleb did not acknowledge it. He pointed to the patrol schedule. Grant's team had been moved away from the West Corridor every night at 2:10 for a mandatory equipment check on the opposite side of the floor. The check lasted 15 minutes. That order came from my office, Grant said. But I did not write it. Lauren opened the approval chain. The request carried Grant's digital authorization, entered from the security director's workstation. Grant looked at Miles. You used my credentials. Or someone copied them. Caleb watched Miles's right hand move closer to the console. Small. Motion. Controlled. The same kind of motion people made when they had already decided what they needed to erase. Lock the terminal, Caleb said. Lauren reached for the command. Miles moved first and closed the access window. The screen went dark, then returned to the login page. System timeout, he said. Caleb looked at the clock in the corner. No. You ended the session. Victoria stared at him. Miles's expression remained calm, but the calm had become work. Elliot Shaw stepped beside Caleb. I remember Corbin now, he said quietly. He was a subcontractor on the Milwaukee protection detail. Miles did not look at him. Caleb did. The detail where the route leaked. Elliot nodded. Sophie watched her father's face change, not with anger, but with recognition. Caleb turned back to Victoria. I need 1 hour, full access to the logs, and Grant with me. For what? To find out whether your blind spot was built for surveillance or for timing. Victoria looked at Miles, then at the 11-minute gap on the screen. You have the hour. Caleb glanced at Sophie before answering. Then she stays with Lauren in a locked office. Victoria nodded. It was the first decision she made that day without asking Miles what he thought. Lauren secured Sophie inside a private records office with reinforced glass, a desk, 2 chairs, and a clear view of the executive security room. Caleb checked the lock himself, then tested the secondary exit before returning to the monitors. Victoria watched him do it. He did not ask whether Sophie was comfortable until he knew no one could reach her unseen. Only then did he kneel beside the glass and point to the silver whistle resting against her sweater. 1 short signal if Lauren leaves. 2 if anyone else enters. Sophie nodded. And 3. You will not need 3. He stood and turned back toward the room. Victoria had spent years surrounded by people trained to make protection visible. Dark suits. Earpieces. Armored vehicles. Men who announced danger by filling doorways. Caleb did the opposite. He reduced himself until only the person he was protecting remained important. You always do that, she said. Do what? Check where your daughter is before you look at the threat. Caleb opened the copied access logs on an isolated terminal. She is part of the threat assessment. That sounds cold. It is the opposite. Grant stood beside him, reviewing the West Corridor schedule. The humiliation from the training room had disappeared. In its place was attention. What are we looking for? He asked. A reason for the 11-minute window. Caleb aligned the camera loop, elevator command, and patrol diversion on one timeline. The changes began 6 months earlier, always on nights before Victoria met privately with investors, legal counsel, or acquisition targets. Someone was not simply testing access. They were mapping her decisions. Victoria moved closer. Those meetings were confidential. Not to whoever controlled the corridor. Caleb asked Lauren to pull the environmental sensor records from the service elevator. Temperature, weight, door cycles, and emergency lighting operated on a separate system from security video. The logs showed the elevator stopping at the 23rd floor during each camera loop, even when the Access archive claimed it had remained idle. Grant leaned toward the screen. Someone wrote it. Or sent it up empty to test response times, Caleb said. We need the weight sensor. Lauren opened the record. On 4 nights, the elevator carried between 160 and 190 pounds. On 3 others, less than 20. A person sometimes. Equipment other times. Victoria's expression tightened. What kind of equipment? Caleb looked toward the conference room wall shared with the service corridor. Something small enough to move quietly and useful enough to return for. Miles remained seated under Grant's observation, claiming he was cooperating while refusing to unlock his administrative archive without legal counsel. Caleb did not press him. He asked Lauren for maintenance invoices instead. One vendor appeared repeatedly near the dates of the loops, a communications contractor authorized to inspect fire alarms, ceiling sensors, and conference room wiring. The approval signature belonged to Miles. Victoria read the name twice. They installed the boardroom. Audio system. Caleb looked at the conference room beyond the glass. Then the blind spot was not built to reach you. What was it built to reach? Everything said around you. The answer settled over the room. Victoria remembered negotiations that had failed after competitors anticipated her offers, private acquisitions that leaked before board approval, and one legal strategy that appeared in the press within hours. She had blamed disloyal directors, careless assistants, even Grant's route team. Never the walls. Caleb picked up his tool case and walked toward the conference room. Before entering, he checked the office where Sophie sat. Victoria saw it again. Not paranoia. Priority. She followed him. You knew the system was wrong before you knew me. Caleb looked at the misaligned camera above the corridor. Systems reveal what people assume. And what did I assume? He met her eyes without anger. That the strongest person in the room was the safest one. Caleb entered the conference room without touching the table, the chairs, or the polished wall panels. He stood in the center for several seconds and listened. Air moved softly through the ceiling vents. The building's mechanical systems hummed beneath the floor. Nothing sounded unusual. That did not mean nothing was there. Grant closed the glass door behind them while Victoria remained near the entrance, watching Caleb study the room she had used for private negotiations, legal strategy, and acquisition meetings. Lauren stayed in the security suite with Sophie and the copied logs. Miles remained under observation, still insisting the access gaps were routine maintenance. Caleb opened his tool case and removed a handheld frequency detector, a fiber optic inspection light, and a small mirror on an extension rod. Start with the ceiling sensors, Grant said. Caleb shook his head. That is where they expected you to look. He walked toward the wall shared with the service corridor and examined the narrow seam beneath the audio control panel. One screw carried a slight discoloration around its edge. The others did not. This panel has been opened more recently than the maintenance record shows. Victoria moved closer. Could the room have been monitored from there? Not by the building system. Caleb loosened nothing yet. He asked Lauren through the secure line to compare the communications contractor's visits with the 11-minute camera loops. Her answer came less than a minute later. Every recorded visit occurred on the same night as a missing interval. Always beginning at 2:17 in the morning. Always ending at 2:28. 11 minutes, Victoria said. Exactly. Caleb looked at the service elevator wall. Enough time to bring equipment up, open this panel, collect data, and leave before the live feed returned. Grant checked the conference room schedule. But they came on nights when no meetings were happening. They did not need the meetings, Caleb said. They needed the recordings. Victoria's face changed. The room's digital audio system stored encrypted backups for 30 days in case legal teams requested transcripts. She had been told the files never left the internal network. Caleb asked Lauren to pull the backup access history. One administrator credential had opened the archive during every camera loop. The credential had no employee name, only a high-level security designation. Who can create that? Victoria asked through the secure line. Lauren paused. Miles, Grant, and the chief executive account. Grant's jaw tightened. I never created it. Neither did I, Victoria said. Caleb looked at the wall panel. Then someone wanted the trail to point in 3 directions. He used the inspection mirror beneath the lower edge and found a thin black cable running behind the audio controller toward the service corridor. It did not appear on the installation diagram. Grant crouched beside him. Can you remove it? Not until we know where it ends. Caleb followed the cable through the wall cavity using the fiber optic light. It passed behind the insulation and entered a small wireless transmitter fixed to the metal framing near the corridor side. The transmitter was no larger than a deck of cards. It had no active light. No label. No factory markings. Victoria stared at it through the narrow opening. How long has that been there? At least 6 months, based on the dust line. Caleb did not touch it. It may still be sending. Lauren checked the network spectrum from the security room. A low-power signal appeared once every 60 seconds, matching the remote validation pulse from the access reader. The transmitter, the temporary credential, and the camera loop were part of the same system. Grant looked toward the glass wall separating the conference room from the corridor. They were using the elevator to collect the data. Caleb nodded. And testing the path every night before an important meeting. Victoria folded her arms, but the gesture no longer looked defensive. It looked cold. Focused. Can we prove who controls it? Caleb looked through the glass toward the security suite, where Miles sat beside a dark terminal and watched them through the monitor wall. Not if he knows we found it. Victoria followed his gaze. Then what do we do? Caleb closed the panel exactly as he found it. We let the system believe tomorrow's board meeting is still happening on schedule. The board meeting remained on the calendar for the next morning, but almost nothing about it would be real. Victoria sent the expected schedule through the same executive system Miles had monitored for months. Lauren reserved the usual conference room, uploaded a false acquisition packet, and marked the meeting as confidential. Grant reassigned his team exactly as the altered patrol schedule required, then quietly placed trusted officers outside the service elevator and the records office where Sophie would remain. Caleb changed only what the hidden system could not see. He moved Victoria's actual board discussion to a secured room 2 floors below, disconnected the internal microphones, and created an isolated copy of every access log before midnight. Sophie sat beside Lauren with the silver whistle resting against her sweater, completing a school worksheet while her father checked the emergency stairwell for the 3rd time. Victoria watched him from the corridor. "You trust the plan?" she asked. Caleb looked toward the nearest camera. "I trust what people repeat when they believe no one is watching." At 2:16 in the afternoon, the false meeting appeared to begin. Empty chairs surrounded the polished table upstairs. A pre-recorded conversation played softly through the conference room speakers, discussing a fictional offer large enough to interest anyone selling corporate information. Miles remained in the security suite under Grant's observation, claiming he needed access to monitor the executive floor. Victoria allowed him a restricted terminal. Caleb stood behind the glass wall where he could see Miles, the camera feeds, and the private elevator status at once. The digital clock changed to 2:17. The west corridor image froze. A cleaning cart stopped in the exact position Caleb had seen in the archived loop. The timestamp continued moving, but the reflection on the marble floor did not. "The camera is not live," Grant said. Caleb nodded. The private elevator received an executive command from an unassigned administrator credential. Its doors opened on the service level, then began rising toward the 23rd floor. Lauren's isolated monitor captured the command before the system could erase it. Miles looked at the screen and reached for his keyboard. "Routine fault," he said. Caleb watched his right hand. "Do not touch the terminal." Miles continued moving. Grant stepped between him and the console. No force. No raised voice. Just a closed path. The elevator stopped one floor below the false meeting room, exactly where the hidden transmitter's receiver had connected during earlier loops. A maintenance badge activated the service door. The trusted officers intercepted the contractor carrying a compact collection unit inside a plain equipment case. No one resisted. No one was harmed. Lauren copied the badge identity and matched it to the communications vendor Miles had approved. Then the hidden module inside the conference wall sent its 60-second pulse. Caleb had routed the signal into an isolated recorder. Every command appeared in sequence: camera loop, elevator authorization, archive access, data transfer, automatic log removal. The final instruction originated from Miles's restricted terminal. Victoria stood beside Caleb and watched the evidence build itself. Miles saw the source address appear and stopped pretending. "You do not understand the business pressure behind this," he said. "Competitors already knew where she was weak." Caleb kept his eyes on the screen. "So you sold them the map." "I controlled the exposure." Victoria's expression went still. "You created it." Lauren opened the contractor's payment records. The transfers came from a consulting company linked to a rival bidder currently negotiating against Hale Meridian. Grant looked at the falsified patrol approvals bearing his credentials. "You plan to leave my name on the failure." Miles said nothing. Security preserved his devices and escorted him to a private interview room pending the investigation. Caleb did not watch him leave. He checked the records office first. Sophie lifted the whistle when she saw him through the glass, then lowered it when he nodded. Victoria noticed. Only after confirming his daughter was safe did Caleb turn back to her. The false meeting continued playing upstairs to an empty table. "You could have exposed him without putting yourself in the building," she said. Caleb looked at the frozen corridor feed. The danger was never the person coming through the door. Grant stood beside him, understanding now. Caleb pointed toward the dark terminal Miles had used. It was the person deciding where everyone else should look.